Right, let's get into it. Blair is, just give you a bit of what's coming up. We're going to not go into too much with Blair today because he is actually coming over to Perth next week and we've teed up an interview. We've committed to it now. Hopefully, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. So we're going to have a more in-depth interview next week. But we're, as we mentioned previously, we did a bit of a piece on Patriot Battery Metals last week. Look, it's the big hot topic, the massive lithium stock in Canada, both trading on the TSX and the ASX. We did have a few queries about a couple of things which were received, interestingly, by the Hot Copper and YouTube audience. But, hey, why not go to the horse's mouth? So let's get into it. Blair, we've just got him on the blower now. Righto, Blair Way, CEO and President of Patriot Battery Metals. Welcome to Money of Mine, Cobber. How you going, mate?
I'm doing great, guys. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for reaching out after we did a little YouTube video about Patriot, a couple of queries that we had, and geez, didn't it spark some hot copper interest? So we're why not just go, as I said before, straight to the horse's mouth and get the big dog on you. So we really appreciate you getting in touch, mate, and coming on for a yarn.
Absolutely, and it's always better to talk to these things as close to the source because that way there's less confusion. And as you say, places like Hot Copper or CEO.ca, they have a feeding frenzy on some sort of misquote or miss something, and it gets out of control. So this way we talk it through and everything makes sense.
Well, they're having a good feeding frenzy on us, so we took the heat off you, mate. But anyway, I look at you, I look at Patriot as, you could say it's nearly it's the Bitcoin of the lithium industry at the moment. You've got a sensational looking intersections and deposit. It's a big humdinger. But there was we're just going to play you a little snippet, and this is what initially drew the attention. So this was some bogan Aussie podcast bloke referring to you last week. Let's just hear it first. So 5% you're heading towards pretty much pure spodumene.
In all fairness, do we know if that's true width? I mean, we haven't seen cross sections.
Exactly. And this is where I was leading to. So we they could have just drilled that right through the strike of the ore body for all we know. Oh, there you go. Now that was what I brought up. So, and I guess the question we initially had: where are the drill cross sections or is everything a bit different in Canadian reporting compared to the ASX reporting standards?
Well, funnily enough, there is some differences, but it's also, I'm a geologist, as sad as that may be. So I'm more of a technical person in many respects, and I hate sections that are quite frankly bullshit. And when you take a section from a proper drill intercept, and I see the cartoons that are presented on many press releases. I won't name names because that's just a bit nasty, but they're misleading. Now, they can be misleading in a good way and a bad way. And to be honest, I put a few press releases together with sections on it that we did the cartoons, and all the technical people got it. And, within our internal review, and then all the non-technical people are going, well, there's something wrong here. Why is it doing this? And these sections that are put out there, until you actually have a proper resource and a proper delineated model, and keep in mind, this is pegmatite, so it pinches and swells laterally and to depth. It's confusing. And when I see some of the sections my peers, shall I say, are putting out, and they leave this big open swath into your imagination, and it carries on for sometimes 20, 30, 50, 100 meters to depth. You don't know that until you've drilled. So we're drilling, we're providing the data. So technical people can take that, put it in their own favorite modeling software, and they can see. We've also drilled opposite sides, so we're not drilling down dip. You can tell that by the azimuth and where we're starting from. But yeah, I've intentionally stayed away from sections because they are very misleading. And for me to put one in that's technically accurate will probably upset some people in a bad way and upset some people in a good way. So we elected to keep the sections out until we get our first maiden resource, and then we'll give people all kinds of stuff to chew on. But that is why we've shared that data. So you've got the latitude and longitude, and you can feed it in. So technical, I've had this discussion countless times here in Australia, and I push back on it every time.
You probably get that in Australia because unfortunately our development history is riddled with a few companies that notoriously didn't put out cross sections, and then when they built the mine, it didn't quite stack up. So it's certainly in Australian context as a bit of an alarm bell goes off when we get presented with a big discovery that doesn't have cross sections.
But you look at the cross sections that are out there. Technically, they're wrong. I mean, as I said, I can name names. Some just came out the day before yesterday, and they show this big extension. They show one intercept of 20 odd meters, and it shows it carrying on to infinity at depth forever at that thickness. And pegmatite doesn't behave like that. We know it has these lenses and gets quite squibby in places, to use a term that Ken Brinston likes to use. And in this situation, until you really have well-riddled drill holes through this thing, you're just making stuff up, and it is misleading. These ones, I have the press release open, and it's an ASX listed company, and they're beautiful cartoons, but hugely misleading. So, and they look great. Don't get me wrong. I love the way they look. I'd love to feel comfortable presenting that, but it is super promotional to show one drill intercept and extrapolate it over 100 meters to depth when there's no other drill hole deeper than that.
With all due respect, I give you credit to coming on the show. Like, it's especially when we were poking the bear a little bit with our last video, but with all due respect, you can't call the cartoons promotional when there's 50 photos of drill core in your announcements, but no geological interpretation.
But drill core shows exactly, and this is another thing. It actually shows if you have it with a trained eye, you can see the spodumene. So that's at least showing that the mineralization is truly there in the pegmatite. It's not just mapping the pegmatite; it's mapping the spodumene within the pegmatite. So there's mineralization within the pegmatite, and then you have the pegmatite. So our pegmatite intercepts we share, but the spodumene mineralization within the pegmatite varies within the overall intercept of the pegmatite. So do you want to see a cross-section of the spodumene mineralization or of the pegmatite?
I think in all honesty, I want to see a cross-section of management's best understanding of the ore body to date. Via again, we all know geology is more art than science, and especially in the early days. But we get some insight as an investor. You get some insight out of understanding what management's best interpretation is at this point in time, and we know that's subject to change. That's fine.
No, but it is. They are misleading. We extract them from a model, and that model, if there's no data to depth or to the east or to the west or to the north or the south, then it will pinch it to zero, because that's how the model works. In order for us to build the cartoons that is more common here in Australia, we have to actually disconnect from the model and hand draw these things and create something that's really not representative of what we know. It's what we hope or we guess. And that's what a lot of these sections are. They're hopes and guesses. So we keep it to the facts. The data is there. The technical people that can build the model and can also see the configuration of the pegmatite deposit.
I think when the mineral resource comes out later this year, Blair, I assume we'll see a lot more actual pictorial representations.
There'll be longitudinal sections, there'll be cross sections, because then we've established those cutoffs to depth, to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. And then you're dealing with a clear and concise picture, also with a ton of, we're going to have 60 or 70,000 meters in this thing, so there's no question about it. But the meters that we have drilled has certainly demonstrated significant scale. We're not drilling down dip because we've drilled opposite ways so that it's quite clear. And as I said, I've had a number of news releases that had the cartoons in it, and we pulled them at the last minute each time because they were just confusing to your average reader, in our opinion.
Thanks for giving your take on that, Blair. I think we'll jump into the segment we played. It was a quote that I had discussed when we spoke last week. It's regarding the sort of gold to lithium conversion. We'll just play that now. And there was another statement that Blair Way, the CEO, said that stood out to me just reading this the other day. To put it into perspective, if I said we have identified 10 million ounces and the grade is about 2 or 3 ounces per tonne, you'd say, shit, that's pretty significant.
But you didn't say shit either, did you?
I didn't say shit.
I pointed that out to JD afterwards. He was being too polite.
Yeah. So firstly, that was great. We heard that on another mining podcast, and it's always good to hear people speak with the CEOs like yourself coming on today. And yeah, we just want to dig into that a bit. Obviously, we get that things run a bit different in Canada. And
No. It's just out of context. It doesn't run any different. I can't talk about compare. I was not comparing our deposit to some equivalent. It's even stricter in Canada. That was not an equivalency. What I was saying is, it's like, I'll give you an analogy. Here in Australia, I've been here 30 years. If I go and tell someone, oh man, I got this great cruiser ute that's like $170,000, and I go into Canada and I tell someone, they go, what the hell are you talking about? What the hell's a ute? What's a Land Cruiser ute? Never heard of it. I said, oh no, I just got a great, and I rephrase it. I got this great pickup truck. It's like an F-250. It's loaded. It's awesome. And they'll know what I mean. That's all it really was. It was about getting context. So in Canada, they've never heard of a Pilbara. They've never heard of Minres, for the most part. Not everybody, but for the most part. So it was kind of taken out of context. I understand. When I heard you say, I was like, holy crappers. That's not at all what I was saying. I was not saying what we have is equivalent to anything. What I'm saying is, if I was talking about a deposit of some type in Canada, if it was nickel, if it was gold, I could have picked any of them. I chose nickel because it's so easy. Like I was on a gold project in Colombia. We had 6 million ounces, and the grades were awesome. I forget the grades off the top of my head. It was 15 years ago, and it just got so much attention. Everyone loved it. Now, what I was saying is, we have something pretty significant in respect to lithium, bigger than anything they've ever seen in Canada. How big our deposit will be defined in a mineral resource, and then that's when people can start to do their comparisons. But if it was somehow misinterpreted, I was saying that our deposit is equivalent to a 10 million ounce. No way. All I was saying is that they understand it. It was putting it into a context of understanding. It had nothing to do with 10 million ounces at whatever I said it was, 2 ounces per ton or whatever it was. There was no equivalency. It was just saying Canadians understand gold. They understand nickel, less so zinc, but they understand zinc. That's a phosphate. There are things that they really get, but they do not typically get lithium. And what makes a good lithium deposit? Is it 0.1% at 100 million tons, or is it 1% at 100 million tons? Yes, the average layman in the sector, like in the mineral resource sector, they're going to go, I'm not sure. That was all my point was. I was not trying to, if it was mistaken to be that, that's my bad. That was not my intention.
Yeah, you've made it, Blair. You have to feel like a bit of a rock when people are actually extracting your quotes apart and publishing them on the internet. Mate, you're pretty much like a president, aren't you? So yeah, you'd have to take. I'd be just more flattered by this whole experience than anything.
Well, I'm reading. I actually got into a cold sweat. I'm like, holy shit, did I actually say that? I mean, I didn't even say I said shit just now, but I said holy crappers on that one. So I was like, did I? I didn't think I said. Now I know I can swear more, so that's good.
There's definitely more. There's definitely an element of we call it the tall poppy syndrome in Australia, because these widths and scale is just initially is looking so big, but there's always that, as Trav said before, that potential element of doubt. It's like, will it stack up, especially since you've had such a prolific rise in the share price.
We're not doubting that that this is a phenomenal discovery.
I
know. That to us is not on at least on my mind, and I'm a skeptic, I'm a cynic, and so I will. I'm 100% wired to hone in on the things that look like BS to me. And one category, the question that's sort of on my mind and a lot of people's mind is in relation to the lakes. And I'm sure you get this question all the time. But
that's my number one question in Australia.
Yeah, totally.
Lakes. Number 2 is the sections.
So 2 out of 3, we're all over it.
Let me frame the question. Yeah. Like everyone refers to these lakes as shallow. What does shallow mean?
Okay, so a shallow glacial lake, if you go to Google Earth, you'll see it's prolific with lakes. And what happens is that's a Canadian shield. And it was scraped clear with the ice ages, over a number of ice ages, scraped it down right down to the base rock, the basement rock. So then it dumps it all back on the ground again as glacial till, as the glacial melts away. So you end up with a relatively flat lying continental shelf with undulations, so as to speak, and some harder materials sticking up, but mostly it's relatively flat from a continental point of view. And so you end up with, as the winter happens, it snows and it rains, and then it snows, freezes, then it melts. So you end up with this sort of sheet flow of water from the east towards the west, towards James Bay. So what we have now, there is where you guys touched on it. We can talk about it more next week, but the Quebec Hydro, and what they did there is they aligned a lot of that water flow into one major river so that they could trap it and generate an amazing amount of very cheap power. But for where we are, we're south. We're about 20 kilometers south of that overall scheme, 25. And you're seeing these quite shallow lakes, even marshes at times. So our shallow lake is around 2 meters deep. There are a couple spots where it had been gouged out, and it is a bit deeper, probably like 7 or 8 meters, maybe even up to 10.
Sorry. The prospectus that you lodged with ASX lists that lake as between 2 to 18 meters deep with an average depth of about 10 meters, less than 10 meters. So what do you mean by 2 to 7?
I mean,
that was in your prospectus.
Yeah. So we've done hydrographic surveys on it. So you do lead line, or you drop some depths. There are a couple spots where it is deeper. Maybe it is 20 meters then, but the average is around 2 meters. We use our drillers use tinnies to go backwards and forwards between the drills up the lake, and they keep pinging their prop on the rocks. I mean, there are a couple areas we think it's a fault or something further to the east. It is a bit deeper, but for the most part, it's a shallow glacial lake, and the level of that lake even drops from when the snow's melted to when we're in sort of midsummer and it dries out a bit. It drops by a couple of feet. So then, depending on if you take it when it's frozen, then it's obviously a lot shallower because it's frozen for 2 or 3, in some cases, 1.5 meters. But they are what are deemed to be shallow glacial lakes, unlike some of the lakes you'll see further south, towards Toronto and Cottage Country and, Lake Superior or Lake Ontario. Those are massive lakes. So anywhere in northern Canada, pretty typically where you put a mine in, you're going to be impacting a lake either via your deposit or via your tailing storage. So it's a pretty well-defined process. It is a federal process, and you have to go through the checks and balances of defining your inflows, your outflows, fish habitat, fish species, and then also working with the First Nations to understand what sort of relevance that particular lake may have for their purposes. And we have been working through that with our First Nation community, which is the Cree and the Chisasibi, and we've been working with them on to look at that lake and the lakes surrounding. As I said, it is what is considered a shallow glacial lakes. To the north of us, if you go on Google Earth, you can see much larger lakes, and they're a bit more significant, and that's where they do a lot of their hunting and fishing. If you go even further north, you'll see the reservoirs that were created from Quebec Hydro, and they're even more significant. They're quite a bit deeper. They're probably up to again, I'm sort of saying over 100 meters deep, in some cases possibly 200 meters. And that's where the fishing is best up there. So there is a very well-defined federal process for permitting the removal or draining of a lake or waterway in order to access a mineral resource.
Yeah, and I think that's the crux of the question I'm trying to get to is we're trying to evaluate what in Australia we have a wide array of different approvals processes, and environmental approval is becoming harder and harder over time. And as an investor in an early stage discovery project, you're constantly trying to evaluate what is the probability that this thing will actually become a mine. And when there's such a binary outcome in environmental approvals, that number matters a lot. And so, in your own sort of investor materials, you point to, Renard Mine and also Diavik as other Quebec operations. The approvals process for both of those, one was approved in 1999, the other one in 2012. So, do you think it's a fair representation to draw on the same framework that approved those mines as it would be for Patriot?
Absolutely. In fact, more recently since that, Critical Elements were Rose Lithium deposit, and also finally James Bay Lithium also got their permit. They all are impacting waterways. Nemaska also impact a waterway. So, in fact, it's pretty hard to find a mine in Canada that does not impact a waterway and hasn't had to go through that federal process. Not every single one. I have to be careful what I say and get quoted, but the majority of mines...
wouldn't want that again.
No, we can't. The majority of mines in Canada, God, it's a bit like if I was to say to you, we're going to build this mine and there's a bloody desert near it. Like, we can't do it. Desert, man. There's only one desert. 2 deserts in Canada, it's sacred. We can't touch that thing. Whereas if you go to WA, it's pretty much all desert. So, building in the desert is sort of commonplace in Canada. I'm not saying we just are flippant about it, but there is a very clearly defined process. I built the Sun Metals refinery in North Queensland under the first EIS that was ever put in place in Queensland, or certainly one of the first. I believe it was the first, but again, be careful what I say. One of the first, if not the first, in North Queensland. We had zero discharge to the reef, to the ocean because of the reef. Now, Queensland Nickel was built in the 70s, so 30 years earlier. And it also had a different environmental compliance requirement. They had different levels of discharge, and that's since changed over the years as that plant was evolved and eventually shut down due to other reasons in the actual operation. But I guess my point being is that the relevance of the lakes and the ability to permit within the boundaries of being able to drain a waterway in order to access a mineral deposit is well within the scope today as it was 5 years ago. I'm not saying it's easy, and there is a process that you have to go through, but it's like any other permitting process. Just like in Queensland and WA, there's a very clear rule book, and that rule book can be worked to. I have been involved with projects in developing nations where those rule books are constantly changing, and they're not changing because they're, say, getting more tough or more easy or whatever. They're just changing because of the change of government. The EIS process in Canada has been in place for many years, and it does evolve. There are more studies that we have to do in order to demonstrate that we're minimizing the amount of impact that we have. And that's one of the reasons the first environmental baseline work I did was last summer, because I wanted to understand that lake. We did a survey of the lake. We did a survey of the inflows and outflows, and we have to monitor over a number of seasons so that we're as well informed as we can when we define what it looks like, when and where we have to put in a bund wall in order to drain that aspect of the lake in order to access the deposit as we define it in our mineral resource. So it is well defined.
If you're going to stack up the draining of the lake alongside on-site construction, that whole process is the draining of the lake the most critical path towards production for this project, would you consider?
It's probably one of the more time-consuming aspects of it, but we've been advised with the permitting team that we brought on board, and they've spent the majority of their career in Quebec and are very familiar with both the permitting of draining of lakes as well as just permitting the processing facility and everything else we have to do in order to get into production. And they've advised me, and based on other statistical evaluations, some of our peers in recent years, such as Critical Elements, such as James Bay, if we submit our project description and then we submit a good EIS, not a crappy EIS, if we submit an EIS that has covered all the things we're asked for by the government, it's a 2.5-year process in order to get to the point where we can start construction. We believe that's achievable if we do a good EIS. And that's one of the reasons why my press release last week talks about our environmental baseline study. You won't see a lot of exploration companies doing this level of work at this stage of an exploration play. But for us to be sure that we have all that baseline information, to be sure our EIS actually addresses all the concerns we believe that will be raised as a normal process of permitting a project like that. So we're doing this work as soon as we can to benefit from not only this summer, we'll end up doing some for next summer as well. So we have multiple seasons in order to ensure that my goal is to submit to the federal and Quebec government the best EIS they've seen so that we can be sure that we push it through. There are some good examples, recent examples of kind of subpar EISs that have been put in, and they get asked to do more work. Then they have to go through another seasonal cycle, and that takes time. That's not the fault of the permitting process. That's the fault of the proponent. They may be trying to save a few bucks or cut a few corners when they're doing their permitting. There is no question that the environmental side and the permitting side is critical to any project, anywhere you execute it in the world now. So you can't hide from it. You got to take it on head on and start doing your environmental work earlier rather than later. There's always a risk that maybe it doesn't end up being used because of some later issue comes up. But if you don't have that historic baseline information, you're going to have trouble getting your permitting.
Good stuff. Well, thanks very much. We really appreciate you coming on. And as I said, next week on Monday we'll get into real in depth about plenty more about the project. JD and I will be there, but Trav will be dialing in, so you won't be able to physically get your hands on it if he probes you too much.
Yeah, appreciate you joining, Blair. I mean, you come to Australia and because we understand lithium more, but we certainly don't understand draining lakes, and we do like cross sections.
Thanks for coming on, Blair.
There definitely are lakes in Australia where they have mines in the middle of them.
Salt lakes, yes.
I'll get them. They're still lakes, and they flood.
Good on you, mate. We'll look forward to catching up next week, mate. And again, really appreciate you coming on. All
right, great to catch up.
Thanks,
guys.
Blair.
We'll see you next week.
Cheers, mate. All right, what do you reckon, boys? Wasn't shy in coming forward against you, Trav?
Oh, look, I thought there was a bit of two-way tussle going on there. I'm not, to be honest, I didn't find his answers compelling to the questions that we put to him from an investor perspective, but I did appreciate the fact that he came on the show, and I'll give him credit for that.
Right, well, plenty more questions to fire at him on Monday. The Jack Russell will be in Kalgoorlie over the phone, so it'll be all go.